What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am your host, and my name is John. And this week we are back with episode 78, where we will be analyzing and predicting the UFC 243 pay-per-view headlined by the UFC Middleweight Championship unifying bout between Robert Whittaker and Israel-Adesanya. This pay-per-view will go down this Saturday, October 5th, 2019, starting at 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time. There will be two prelims on UFC Fight Pass and ESPN Plus starting at 6:45, with four prelims starting on ESPN2 at 8 p.m. and then moving on to the main card pay-per-view portion on ESPN Plus at 10 p.m. with 5 fights. So only an 11-fight card for this pay-per-view. We did have one fight canceled between Holly Holm and Raquel Pennington pretty recently. So they're continuing with just 11 fights, and it's trending to be one of the biggest events in UFC history, certainly one of the biggest in Anzac history, with that Australian fighter taking on the New Zealand fighter. Actually, they're both New Zealand fighters, but they both spend a lot of time in Australia. It should be a monumental fight over there. I think they're expecting around 50,000 people to come in attendance, maybe even more than that, possibly breaking the record for the most amount of people at a UFC event in history. And they did that back at UFC 193 in Australia too. So the Australian fight fans come out for the UFC, and that's why they're putting on this big time fight. It's really an incredible fight. I can't wait to break it down later. But as always, we will start things off at the bottom of the card. We have 11 fights to preview, so we'll start things off in the bantamweight division, where we have Khalid Taha, who is 13-3, taking on Bruno Silva, who is 11-3-1. The opening line for this one was Khalid Taha, the favorite, at -265 to Bruno Silva at +185. Right now we are seeing Taha -235, Silva +195. So not much action coming in on this fight, although there is two-way action coming in on both sides of these guys, and it's a real close fight. You have Khalid Taha, who has been in the UFC before. He's 1-1 in the UFC. His first fight was at featherweight. He is a natural bantamweight. He took on Nad Narimani in that fight and was really just outmatched by the size and got outboxed, out-wrestled by Narimani. It just proved that he was not ready for that featherweight division. And then he got back on track at bantamweight when he knocked out Boston Salmon in his last fight with a left hook in 30 seconds. It was just a massive punch, floored Salmon, and he followed it up with some ground and pound, got the early finish. So got back on track. I'd say Taha's got some pretty good boxing. That would definitely be his strong suit. He's taking on Bruno Silva in this fight, who is making his UFC debut. He trains with Cejudo out in Phoenix, and unfortunately his last loss was a 7-second head kick knockout loss. Just got knocked out cold in 7 seconds. But he's picked up some decent victories from then on. Not too much footage of Silva online. It seems like his bread and butter would be the submission games, but he throws power on the feet as well. He was on The Ultimate Fighter. He picked up a nice victory in that fight. He actually landed a front kick on his opponent and broke his jaw 5 seconds into the fight. Just started fast, threw a massive front kick, and it broke the opponent's jaw right away. And that fight was stopped after the first round. So he has shown the ability to get offensive takedowns. He definitely shines in the submission game, and he's got some decent striking as well. So I agree with Taha being the favorite. He's got that UFC experience. He looks a little more well-rounded and polished, calculated in his approach to the fights, but I don't necessarily think that he should be this much of a favorite. I'd say that there is a little bit of value on the dog Silva in this one. He has not fought very recently. I think he's coming off of a long layoff, so you could see Bruno Silva make some big improvements in this one. And I don't think that 30-second knockout Taha got in his last fight is exactly proof that he's a legitimate fighter. I'd still say that there's a lot up in the air about Taha that we have not seen. So it's going to be a dog or pass situation. I think that eventually Taha does get the decision victory, but it's definitely dog or pass at these prices. The next fight takes place in the women's flyweight division. We have Nadia Kassem, who is 5-1, taking on Ji-Yeon Kim, who is 8-2-2. The opening betting line for this one was Kassem, the -140 favorite, to Ji-Yeon Kim +100. Right now we are seeing Kim -210, Kassem plus 175. So much more action coming in on Ji-Yeon Kim. She opened plus 100, implying her probability of winning is 50%. She now sits at minus 210, which implies her probability is over 67%. So there's a huge shift that came in on Ji-Yeon Kim, a 17% difference in her implied probability from the time that she opened to where she's at now. So the sharp action came in on Kim heavy, and I think it's the right side of things. We're just looking at a relatively low-level female fight. Kassem has one victory in the UFC over Alex Chambers, but that was a bad victory. She lost the first round of that fight pretty decisively to Chambers. Chambers started to gas out in the second two rounds, and Kassem was winning the rounds, but she wasn't winning them dominantly. She was getting taken down by a gassed out Chambers. She wasn't keeping position. She wasn't dominating Chambers, and Chambers is an old fighter. She's a veteran who doesn't have much skill, not very athletic. She's like 40 years old or something like that, and Kassem didn't even look good against her when she was gassed out in the later rounds. So I really don't have much faith in Kassem. Her last fight was a complete mismatch. She got dominated by Montana De La Rosa. I was on De La Rosa pretty heavy in that fight for a max bet, and it cashed very easily. And it was just even though De La Rosa was minus 250, she looked minus 900 in that fight. So I just said that Kim is the better overall fighter. She's shown some decent aspects of MMA throughout her career. She's picked up a couple victories over decent opponents. She's shown glimpses of decent boxing. She throws a nice jab out. She was actually tied one round apiece versus Justine Kish. She realized it was a close fight. She picked up the pace in round 3, and she won a crucial last round and won her that decision. So I think she's just a more well-rounded fighter. She knows what it takes to win a close decision sometimes, and her last fight was with Antonina Shevchenko. She was completely outclassed in that fight in the kickboxing realm of things, but she didn't get finished, and Shevchenko actually has some decent finishing abilities, so that wasn't the worst performance from her. I just think that Kim is the better overall well-rounded mixed martial artist, and that's why you're seeing that huge action coming in on Kim. I'm going to agree with it. Where the line is at now, it's definitely dog or pass. Don't get it twisted. We're still dealing with a pretty low-level skill women's mixed martial arts fight, and anything could happen in those type of fights. So I would not be laying over 2-1. I would not be laying anything over minus 150 on Kim personally. Not saying there's quite value on Kassem either, because I think she ultimately loses. But it's gonna be a dog or pass where it's at now. But the pick is gonna be Kim to win a decision. The next fight takes place in the women's featherweight division. We have Megan Anderson, who is 8-4, taking on Zara Farim dos Santos, who is 6-2. The opening betting line for this one was Anderson minus 300, dos Santos plus 220. We are now seeing Anderson minus 600 to dos Santos plus 450. So massive action coming in on Megan Anderson. This one pushing her implied probability from 75% to around 86%. So people are really trusting Anderson in this one. And even though it's a good matchup for her, it seems like the UFC has given her a little bit of a softball in this matchup after some tough matchups in her most recent fights. I mean, Holly Holm, Kat Zingano, and Felicia Spencer. Those are 3 tough matchups. 3 of the toughest women at featherweight in the women's division. But that does not take away from the fact that Anderson is just a very one-dimensional fighter. It seems like her striking is the only thing that she can rely on. She does not have good takedown defense. She's quite bad on the ground. She got out-grappled, taken down, held down by Holly Holm in her fight, and Holm's not really even a wrestler. And then her last fight against Felicia Spencer, she knew she was facing a great grappler. She landed a few right hands early. She got taken down. She got her back taken. She got choked out in around 2.5 minutes. So, and that was a fight where she was a minus 300 underdog in. So people love betting Anderson. You know, she's a pretty girl with cool tattoos, and she's a fan favorite. So I really think that that's why a lot of action comes in on her. There's no reason why she should be minus 600 in this matchup. And Dos Santos does not look very well rounded either. She's a tall and long fighter. She's got real long arms, throws some straight punches with some decent technique. She doesn't look too skilled in the clinch. She doesn't have the great defense. She doesn't throw with too much power. So I don't. It's going to be hard for Dos Santos to win, but it's not impossible. It's possible that we see a pretty even striking match in this one, and the rounds will probably go to Anderson. But in my opinion, if Anderson doesn't get that knockout in the first round, and then you have any type of bet on Anderson, you're going to be sweating it in the rounds 2 and 3, because I think she could potentially chase that knockout early, not knock Dos Santos out, and then gas out in the later rounds. If you watch her fight with Charlemagne Tweet is super hittable. She was an older fighter at the end of her career. She was eating bombs from Anderson, huge right hands, and it still took her about 15, 20 hard punches for the damage to really start accumulating, and eventually Anderson got the TKO in this one. But I think Anderson's power is really overrated. If you watch that fight, she should have knocked Tweet out in the first few punches. They landed clean. There was no defense being put up from Tweet. She should have knocked her out easily, but it took a while for the knockout to come. So I think Anderson's power is a bit overrated. I still think she is the better striker and fighter of the two in this matchup, but I'm going to go ahead and say that there's pretty big value on Dos Santos at over 4-1. This is just a much closer fight than the odds indicate. We could see Anderson go out there and get a finish early, like she was finishing girls in Invicta, and look real good in front of the home crowd, and it could look like that, but I really don't think that she goes out there and looks like a minus 600 favorite very often. So I think Anderson ultimately wins. She probably gets that first or second round knockout, but there's going to be some value on Dos Santos' money line where it's at, and I think that Dos Santos will be a great live bet after round 1 if she's still standing. So the pick is going to be Anderson to get it done by second round TKO, but not a confident pick. The next fight is in the lightweight division. We have Brad Riddell, who is 6-1, taking on Jumeau-Lima, who is 12-2. The opening betting line for this one was Riddell, the favorite, at minus 135, Mullarkey at minus 105. Right now, we are seeing Riddell minus 160, Mullarkey plus 140. So when I saw these guys' records initially, seeing that they're both from Australia, I thought that the UFC was just bringing in some local guys to fill up slots on the card. But I was pleasantly surprised because both of these guys are pretty well rounded, and I'd say that they deserve to be in the UFC. And I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I think it's a close one. Riddell comes from a kickboxing background, pretty high level as well. Has fought some really good kickboxers. He's got a real good left hook. It's definitely his best punch. He was able to stuff the takedowns of Murdoch in round 1. He actually ended up on top of a scramble, but he didn't have any interest in staying on top. He just led his opponent back to the feet and was able to finish his opponent with punches and knees to the body. Not much footage of Riddell online. That kind of worries me, but he trains at a good gym in Tiger Muay Thai. He has been making some technique videos on YouTube showing that he's working on his wrestling, showing that he's working with some pretty high-level coaches. He was able to stuff the takedowns, get back to the feet versus Song Kenan, and was able to knock him out with a punch to the body. So Song Kenan is a pretty decent UFC welterweight at this point, and that win over Song looks pretty good on Riddell's record. So the one blemish on Riddell's record is an opponent named Bright was able to pull guard on him and tap him pretty instantly with an armbar from his back. So that was not a good look on his record. But as long as Riddell is able to avoid the grappling and the submissions in this fight, I think that he has a pretty good shot at winning. Now, getting over to Mullarkey, he is pretty heavy in his stance. He stands with his feet planted to the ground a little bit instead of moving with a lot of lateral movement, which I think is going to be a problem because I think he's going to be open for leg kicks. He puts a lot of weight on that lead leg, and I think that he could be in trouble if Riddell starts attacking that lead leg. And on the feet, I think Mullarkey has pretty decent boxing, but I just don't think it'll be quite good enough or fast enough to deal with Riddell. I think Mullarkey's best bet is at taking Riddell down, trying to stay on top, trying to tie Riddell out, maybe get a TKO or a submission victory at some point here. So Mullarkey definitely has the ability to do that. He's shown some decent takedowns. He's been able to stay on top. He's landed good ground and pound. But I just think that Riddell's takedown defense is going to be good enough. Working with his coaches over at Tiger Muay Thai, Frank Hickman is a really good wrestling coach. I think that that's going to be good enough for him to stuff the takedowns of Mullarkey, keep this fight standing, where he should outstrike Mullarkey with that kickboxing background he comes from. He has the speed advantage. I think he throws a little more power too, and I see that lead leg of Mullarkey getting chewed up by leg kicks, and then eventually that left hook probably landing getting the knockout on Mullarkey. So the pick is going to be Riddell to get it done by knockout. The next fight takes place in the welterweight division. We have Callan Potter, who is 17-8, taking on Maki-Pitolo, who is 12-4. The opening betting line for this one was Pitolo, the minus 195 favorite, to Potter, plus 155. Right now, we are seeing Pitolo minus 350 to Potter, plus 290. A lot of action coming in on Maki-Pitolo in this one. His implied probability opened up around 65%. Right now it stands around 78%, so big jump in the way of Pitolo, and it's justified completely. I bet Callan Potter in his last fight, and I am ashamed to say that I did. I mean, he looked like a complete bum out there. He had some decent submission victories on his record going in there, and he was taking on, I forget the guy's name, just Jalen Turner, and I thought that he was going to take Turner down and get the submission, bet him 2-1, and he just went out there desperately looked for a submission, went for a stupid omoplata, and then just got knocked out easily. He had no striking defense on the feet. He looked super stiff. He didn't have much effective offense, and I just think that he does not deserve to be in the UFC at all. They're giving him one more fight because he is Australian, but they're giving him that fight against a really tough matchup in Maki-Pitolo. Was super impressed with Maki-Pitolo on the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series. He is a welterweight, but he took a short notice fight at 185, so you should have seen the size difference between him and his opponent. He was outsized by maybe 4 to 6 inches, but he knocked him out in the first round. I mean, he pressured him. He landed some good body shots. He throws heavy hands, digs to the body a lot, and then was able to finish his opponent with the body shots. The guy's named Justin Sumter. It only took him about 100 seconds to get Sumter out of there. So super impressive victory from Pitolo in that one. Pitolo's also got a pretty good grappling game. He had a close grappling fight with Dakota Cochran. He had his back at multiple points in that fight, was not able to get the submission, and eventually got reversed and tapped with the guillotine himself. So that's the way that Callan Potter wins this fight, if he does at all. It would be by way of submission. I expect Potter to go out there to desperately look for takedowns and get the fight to the floor. I don't think he will successfully do so. If he does, Pitolo should be able to escape, get back up, and I think Pitolo will get the first round knockout in this fight. I think Pitolo in round one is minus 150 right now, so it's extremely likely that Pitolo gets that first round knockout, but Potter just has no defense, and Pitolo hits super hard. I think that Potter's in for a rough night in the office, getting knocked out in the first round. I think he might get knocked out in the first minute, honestly, so should be a quick fight in this one. Pitolo is a must for DraftKings, in my opinion, on your lineups this week, and with that being said, we're going to move to the next fight, which takes place in the welterweight division. We have Jake Matthews, who is 14-4, taking on Rustam-Akman, who is 6-1. The opening betting line for this one was Matthews, the favorite, minus 265, Akman plus 185. Right now, we are seeing Matthews minus 350, Akman plus 290. So much more action coming in on the favorite, the hometown guy, Jake Matthews, in this one. And I'm going to disagree with the line movement in this one, actually. I think where the opening line was set was much more accurate than where it's at now. I was actually impressed with Akman in his debut. He came in 6-0. Didn't have much high-level experience. There wasn't much tape of his pro fights online. Didn't really know what to expect, but he showed up and he put in a good effort versus Kondosco. He was actually winning a lot of that fight by just pressuring and throwing a lot more volume than Kondosco. He landed a few hard punches, but he did show some defensive liabilities in that fight. He was getting calf kicked a lot by Kondosco. He got dropped with a punch in round 2, but I was impressed with his ability to get back up to his feet from bottom. He used a leg lock sweep to get back to his feet when Kondosko got top position on him. And his takedown defense overall was very good. In round 3, he was super hard to take down. He was hitting his own takedowns. It was a really grinding type of round 3. But he got reversed in the last minute, and he got hit with a few hard punches to close the round and probably gave away that close round at the end there. But he came into that fight on short notice. He showed good cardio, good takedown defense, some decent technique on the feet. And I was impressed with Akman despite losing that fight. I mean, it was really decided in the last 30 seconds of that fight. It could have been a different decision. So that's not really a bad loss in my opinion for Akman at all. And now getting over to Matthews, doesn't fight that often. Fights mostly in Australia. His last fight was against Anthony Rocco Martin. Looked great in round 1 versus Martin. Was landing hard punches. I was able to drop Martin at one point, but just slowly gave away that fight. He was way less busy in round 2. He started to get outstruck. Started to get calf kicked. Round 3, his calf was damaged bad. Rocco Martin hit him with a one calf kick, forced a terrible shot out of Matthews, and Matthews kind of just shelled up on the ground. And when you shell up on the ground versus Rocco Martin, he's going to snatch your neck, and he eventually was able to tap him with a Darcer, and I think it was an Anaconda choke. But terrible performance from Matthews in that one. Just had the win in the bag and threw it away. I think he's got fight IQ problems for sure, and I saw this brought up before the last fight, and I might have mentioned it in the last podcast, and thinking it was a little maybe too personal, but it ended up being very accurate. I just don't think this guy has what it takes to be a high-level fighter. When he's coached by his dad, and after rounds 1 and 2 of his fighting in the corner, he goes, "How you doing, son? How you feeling? How you feel all right? Your cardio good?" And even the commentator said something on it, like, you got to trust your fighter. You got to tell him what to do. You can't be asking him these questions like babying him in your corner. And I think that Matthews lacks that fight IQ because he just doesn't have that killer instinct or that tenacity to really be a high-level fighter. So that's why I would not bet him at over 3-1. That's why I think there's a lot of value on Rustam-Akman. I think Matthews, overall, his technique isn't bad. He's got decent wrestling, but his striking technique is a little sketchy. He kind of wings punches a little bit. He comes out real aggressive, throws hard punches, but not much technique. He throws hard. I mean, he dropped Li Jianlang like 3 times when they fought, and he drops a lot of his opponents, but it's kind of just from standing and banging, and it's really not a good strategy because I think Akman, despite getting dropped by Kondosko, can take a pretty good punch. And I think that if Akman is still standing after round 1 and he does not get dominated in round 1, I think Akman will be a great live bet because Matthews tends to fade in those later rounds. He tends to wilt and give up to pressure a little bit, and I think Akman can have some real success in these later rounds. So I'm not confident in Matthews at all, honestly. I think I'm actually going to go with picking Rustam-Akman to pull off this upset. I mean, he's plus 290 right now. That means his implied probability is around like 27-28%, but I'm telling you, man, this guy is good. He's also the hairiest motherfucker on earth. I will add that. Never seen a human being so hairy as Rustam-Akman. Not really relevant to the fight, but you never know. So I think we could see Matthews just edge out the decision because he's insanely athletic. I mean, the dude is super strong, and I think he could beat Akman just based on his athleticism, if that really makes sense. But I think that if Matthews does not get that early finish or does not start winning early, I think he could be in for a long night at the office, and he could end up getting upset here by Akman. So the pick is going to be Akman to win by 29-28 decision. The next fight takes place on the main card in the heavyweight division. We have Yorgan De Castro, who is 5-0, taking on Justin Tafa, who is 3-0. The opening line for this fight was De Castro minus 170, Tafa plus 130. Right now we are seeing Tafa minus 135, De Castro plus 115. So the line has flipped, actually. Pretty surprising line movement in this one. You heard it in the records, 5-0 versus 3-0. Both of these guys are super inexperienced, and I honestly think that there's a 90% chance they knock each other out in the first round. I don't think this fight will go longer than 3 minutes. Both of them like to stand and trade and throw bombs, especially Tafa. Tafa's coming out there to straight throw hammers, try to knock you out with big loopy punches. He did actually go for a few takedowns in some of his fights that I watched. The one fight in particular that he got a TKO finish from top in round 2 versus Tina Laga. That fight actually went 8 minutes, and he has picked up a few victories in the second round, which is good for Tafa to show that he can go more than the 5 minutes. But I just think with the way these two match up, they're gonna stand and trade until one of them gets knocked out. And Tafa has wrestled a little bit in his fights, like I mentioned in the last one. But De Castro showed great takedown defense versus Alton Meeks. He was throwing hard calf kicks, and he eventually was able to knock Meeks out, drop him with a leg kick, and finish him off with some ground and pound. So I was super impressed with Castro in that debut over Meeks. He was a plus 600 underdog, and he went out there and looked like the favorite. So super impressive victory from De Castro in that one. But when it comes down to it, this should just be a straight cracker of a fight. They're going to come out there. They're going to trade punches. One man will probably end up hitting the canvas pretty early on. And I think that man will end up being Justin Tafa when it all comes down to it. Now, I might have been lying a little bit when I said it doesn't go past 3 minutes or the first round, because ultimately I see Tafa coming out trying to land that early knockout on Castro. I think Castro is going to cover up. He's going to play defense. He's going to let Tafa tire himself out, and then Castro is going to be looking to land those hard leg kicks, land hard punches himself, and eventually get the knockout on Tafa. So not a confident pick because it's low-level heavyweights. They're likely going to exchange punches until one guy gets knocked out. And realistically, it's a 50-50 fight. So if you're able to get plus money on either guy in this one, I think it's a good bet. I think if you got in on that Tafa plus 130 action, that's a good bet. I think betting on Castro right now plus 115, that's a good bet. The only thing Tafa's really got going for him is that he is the hometown fighter. He might train with a little better of a camp. I think he trains with Tuivasa and those guys. He looks just like him. He's got the same tattoos, the same build and everything. So I'm just assuming he trains with him. But should be a crazy, fun fight. They're going to trade punches until one man falls. I think that man who falls will be Tafa. And I'm going to go with Castro to get the first round knockout in this one. The next fight takes place in the welterweight division. We have Luke Jumeau, who is 13-4, taking on Diego-Lima, who is 14-7. The opening betting line for this one was Lima, the favorite, at minus 230, Jumeau, the plus 170 underdog. Right now we are seeing Lima minus 145, Jumeau plus 125. A little surprised by the action in this one. I thought that Diego-Lima's opening price was much more accurate than where he sits at now. I'm kind of confused by that action coming in on Jumeau, because Jumeau is the Aussie guy in this one. He's got that hometown advantage, but he has not fought for 20 months, and that last fight was a victory over Daiichi Abe, no longer in the UFC, proved to not really be a UFC caliber opponent. The fight before that, he was dominated by Shinzo Anzai, who is a veteran at the end of his career. Just a super bad loss on his record with when you see what kind of fighter Anzai is. I mean, if you watch Jake Matthews' fight, he absolutely slices through Anzai. And Jumeau really struggled with him. He was getting outstriked by him, taken down. He actually got hurt with some punches versus Anzai. So I think that Jumeau's striking is pretty bad. He tries to counterpunch a lot, but he just doesn't have the power or the output to win rounds. His defense is not good. He gets busted up pretty easily. He's usually bleeding in most of his fights. His takedown defense isn't very good. His get-ups aren't very good. I mean, this guy is really underwhelming from all aspects of MMA. I don't see why anyone would be playing Jumeau at this price. I don't think there's any value. I mean, we're talking about he's facing a guy in Lima who is a little unreliable as well, but he has looked good in his past few fights. He came back from the Ultimate Fighter and lost the decision to Yushin Okami. He just got taken down over and over in that fight. And I expect Jumeau to be looking to do that in this fight, because on the feet, I think Lima should have a big advantage. He's a better counter puncher. Lima's got a wicked left hook that he throws with a lot of power. Just knocked out Laprise with it. Was hurting Courtney McGee with it. And Lima was winning 14 minutes and 50 seconds of that fight versus Court McGee. The last 10 seconds decided to stand and trade punches, and he did get dropped at the end of that fight, but he was winning 99% of that fight before that little slip up. So I still think Lima is the better fighter. I think you can trust him at minus 145. I think he's a good bet at his price currently. I think he's able to stuff those takedowns of Jumeau, and I think he's able to outstrike Jumeau in the feet pretty handedly. Lima's been getting that good UFC experience, while Jumeau, he's been facing some injuries, hasn't been active, doesn't really train at a good gym, doesn't really strike me as the guy to come in here and make big improvements. So I think that this is a good fight for Lima. I think he eventually finds a home for that left hook over and over again and gets that second round knockout in this one. So Lima by second round knockout's the pick. The next fight takes place in the heavyweight division. We have Tuivasa, who is 10-2, taking on Sergey Spivak, who is 9-1. The opening betting line for this one was Tuivasa, the favorite, at minus 265 to Spivak plus 185. Right now we are seeing Tuivasa minus 400 to Spivak at plus 325. Another fight where I'm surprised at where the line has gone. I agree with Tuivasa being the favorite. The most I would cap him at is minus 300 because he just isn't trustable at over minus 300. I don't care who he's facing. He has a very limited skill set. He doesn't have great cardio. He doesn't have great output. He doesn't have great defense. He doesn't have great takedown defense. He has very bad jiu-jitsu. I mean, there's not really much to like about Tuivasa besides his personality and the fact that he throws hard punches. I mean, I wouldn't even say he has good boxing because that's not really his style. He doesn't have good fundamentals. He just throws hands. I mean, that's really his style. You saw when he got taken down, or he actually got dropped by Junior Dos Santos, and he got mounted. He had absolutely no idea how to escape mount. He really struggles with grappling. He got outboxed by Ivanov in that fight. He got hurt and dropped a little bit in that fight in round one. He came back in round two, looked a little bit better, landed a hard punch that rocked Ivanov, but still lost the round on value. And he was just gassed out in round three, spent a lot of time resting in the clinch, and just got outworked for all 3 rounds in that fight versus Ivanov. I mean, he got out-volumed by a guy in Ivanov who is notorious for being a low-volume heavyweight striker. And Tuivasa had a pretty even fight with Andrei Arlovsky, another low-output striking match, and I just think that if this fight goes out of the first round and Tuivasa does not get that knockout, I think that not only will you will be sweating the bets. I think he honestly loses the fight if it goes out of the first round. We haven't seen really much from Spivak. We saw him fight a lot of low-level competition in the regionals. Was a lot of old journeyman guys who were at the end of their career, and he didn't even look that good beating them up, honestly. But he's shown some decent striking. He can throw kicks and knees and elbows and punches well. He can hit takedowns. He's got some submission game as well. So overall, I think Spivak is the better well-rounded fighter, and I think that he's getting a little bit disrespected here because his UFC debut was pretty atrocious. He fought Walt Harris. He shelled up early. He just got completely dominated, knocked out in 40 seconds, just covered up and just got completely obliterated with a punch combination by Harris. But I think Harris is actually really underrated. He's one of the top 10 heavyweights in the UFC by far, and I think that he would probably fuck up Tai Tuivasa if they fought too. So that loss doesn't really mean that much to me. I mean, it wasn't a good sign. It's preventing me from going too heavy on Spivak, but I still think from what we've seen at these odds, there's pretty good value on Sergey Spivak. I think there's a lot of guys in this card that I've mentioned where the fights that are super high. I mentioned it with the Dos Santos fight. I mentioned it with Akman, and now I'm mentioning with Spivak. These fighters that are over 3-1 or something like that, I think there's good value on all of them. I think we're seeing some really inflated lines for this card. You're seeing the Australian people being bet like crazy, and they do have easier matchups. Like Anderson and Matthews and Tuivasa do have easier matchups in this one, but when they get in the cage, it doesn't matter what kind of matchup that they have, because anything could happen and they could still lose these fights, even though that their implied probability is at 80%. So I would not be laying chalk on Tuivasa. I would not be using him in parlays. I would not even really be trusting him in DraftKings that much. I think that Sergey Spivak has a decent chance at winning this fight. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go with picking Sergey Spivak to pull off the plus 325 underdog upset. I think that he just has more ways to win the fight. I think that if he chases the takedowns in this one and tries to put Tuivasa on his back and tap him out, I think that would be a great idea. I think that he has a good chance at finishing the fight that way. I think he has a good chance at lasting to a decision and maybe being competitive in the volume with Tuivasa and winning a close decision. I think he has the possibility at landing some hard punches in rounds 2 and 3 after Tuivasa is gassed out from trying to knock Spivak out in round 1, and then Spivak, the one, is knocking him out in rounds 2 and 3. I just think that if Tuivasa doesn't get the knockout in the first 7 minutes, he's losing the fight. I think that his cardio will drop off bad, and I really don't have anything to prove that Spivak's cardio is good too. I mean, there's really no evidence that he has good cardio or that he can have that high output in rounds 2 and 3. I'm kind of just getting a feel for this one. I think that Spivak is a live dog in this one. I'm going to pick him to pull off the upset. I'm going to go with a first round submission for Sergey Spivak in this one. The odds of that got to be like plus 1,000, but I'm going to pick it anyway. The next fight is the co-main event of the evening in the lightweight division. We have Al Iaquinta, who is 14-5-1, taking on Dan Hooker, who is 18-8. The opening betting line for this one was Iaquinta minus 130, Hooker minus 110. Right now we are seeing Hooker minus 165 to Iaquinta at plus 145. So way more action coming in on Dan Hooker in this one, and I think that action is spot on. I think this is a great matchup for Hooker. I think he probably gets the knockout in this one. I mean, I think he's got 8 finishes in his UFC, 8 wins, 8 finishes in his UFC career. Hooker's a finisher, and I think that this matchup is really good for him for a bunch of different reasons. So Iaquinta coming off of that loss versus Cowboy in his last fight. He went the full 5 rounds. He had some early success with the boxing. Probably lost round 1, definitely won round 2, but then round 3 he started to get outstruck, outvolumed. Round 4 started to get hurt bad. Round 5 he was completely out of it and dominated and somehow lasted to the decision, but he took a lot of damage in that fight, and he was clearly outstruck by Donald Cerrone. He really struggled with the diverse offense of Cerrone. When Cerrone started mixing in those kicks and those knees and the clinch, Iaquinta was a little bit lost, because Iaquinta has good boxing. He has a good wrestling base. He has decent takedown defense, submission defense, has good ability to hit offensive takedowns, but in the kicking game, I think he struggles. I think he struggles with longer, rangier guys, and I think that that's exactly what Dan Hooker is. He's a super long, 6-foot lightweight. He fights super long. He utilizes his reach to the full advantage, and I think that we've really seen Hooker come into his own in the past few fights. I mean, he's knocked out some pretty good fighters. He knocked out Pearson. He knocked out Jim Miller, he knocked out Gilbert Burns, and he knocked out James Vick, and that's all within the past maybe year or two. So those are 4 solid wins. I mean, Pearson is a little shaky because he's an older veteran, no longer in the UFC. But those are, I mean, Miller, Burns, and Vick, those are 3 solid wins. He dropped that decision, or he dropped that knockout loss to Barboza in between there. Sometimes he struggled with the kicks of Barboza as well. He didn't really pressure enough in that fight as he should have. Got picked apart at range with the kicks and was eventually finished with the kicks to the body in that one. Just a brutal performance. Both of these guys have taken some damage in their last fights, but the difference being Hooker has come back since he took that massive amount of damage versus Barboza, and he dismantled James Vick in the first round, knocking him out, picking up that great read, faking that right hook, and then landing that left hook to knock him out. The one thing about Hooker is he has power in both hands. He dropped Gilbert Burns with the right hand, and then he finished him off with the left hand. So he's got massive power in his hands. He has super good long knees. I mean, he knocked Miller and Pearson out with those long knees. He has a good reactive guillotine he can use to stuff takedowns. He actually tapped a few people with it, like Mark Diakese. He used it effectively versus Gilbert Burns to stuff the takedown to get back up to his feet. So I think that Iaquinta is just in for a tough night, honestly. If this fight stays in the feet, in the boxing aspect of things, it could be a little competitive, but when Hooker starts mixing in his movement, his knees, his kicks, I think that he will start to outstrike Iaquinta. Iaquinta's best path to victory would be to try to mix in the takedown somehow, to try to get inside on Hooker, because if he stays at the range of Hooker where he can use that reach advantage and use those long knees and straight punches, then Iaquinta is probably going to get boxed up and likely even knocked out. I mean, Hooker's a finisher. He chases the finish. He throws hard strikes with all 8 limbs, and I think that he has a great chance at finishing Iaquinta, even though Iaquinta is super durable. And if Iaquinta is able to possibly hit offensive takedowns, put Hooker on his back, if he's able to make this a grinding type of fight where it's inside, where it's in the clinch, and it's where Hooker doesn't have that range to strike, he could potentially steal a decision in this one, but I really don't give it a good chance at happening. I think that this one ends inside the distance, which is at plus 155 right now, and I think Hooker gets the knockout in this one, which is plus 255 right now. So I think Hooker eventually gets the knockout, probably in the later rounds 2 and 3, when the damage starts to accumulate, because I don't think you're going to knock Iaquinta out with one punch. It's going to be an accumulated damage type of finish. Hooker's likely going to be bloodied, or Iaquinta's likely going to be bloodied and beat pretty badly, and the referee will probably stop in and save him. I'm going to go with Hooker getting the second round TKO victory in this one. And in the main event of the evening for the unifying UFC middleweight championship fight, we got the champion Robert Whittaker, who is 24, taking on the interim champion Israel Adesanya, who is undefeated at 17-0. The opening betting line for this one was Israel Adesanya, the plus 160 underdog, to Robert Whittaker as the minus 185 favorite. Right now we are seeing the line flip. Israel Adesanya minus 115 to Robert Whittaker at minus 105. A near pick'em fight, as it rightfully should be. So whoever set that opening line of Adesanya plus 160 was drunk as a skunk. There might have been some intent behind it to put Izzy as that plus money. I really don't know what the motivation behind it was, but the line was certainly wrong. Where the line sits at now is really accurate, honestly. It's a 50-50 type of fight. If you have a confident lean in this one, I would say it's still a 55-45 type of fight. I mean, these guys are totally evenly matched. They're elite level fighters. They're both two of the best middleweights in the world, no question, and it's going to be an absolute pleasure to see these two banging out on Saturday night. It's going to be an epic fight. I honestly think eventually it's a 48-47 decision for either guy. I could be basing this off of their last few fights, because both of their most recent fights were 5-round slobber knockers where they hurt their opponents and their opponents hurt them, and they were 2-2 heading into the 5th or something like that, and they were close rounds and they both squeaked out the decisions. Whittaker really squeaked his out. That was a really close fight. Probably could have been a draw or even gone to Romero. Meanwhile, Adesanya, the judges scored that fight absolutely perfectly, 48-46, all 3 cards. It was 2-2 heading into the 5th. Israel Adesanya dug deep and got that 5th round 10-8. We'll start talking about Adesanya first, just to go over a little full profile of him. So he's actually been probably one of the most talked about fighters on the Martian MMA podcast, and that's because he's been so active. 6 fights in the past 20 months. Made his UFC debut back at UFC 221 just in February of 2018, and he's already moved his way up from beating Wilkinson to Vettori to Tavares to Brunson to Silva to Gastelum. I mean, he's beaten better and better and better fighters each time, and he really had a showcase performance, I think, in his last fight versus Kelvin Gastelum, because even though he got dropped in round 1 briefly in that fight, and he got hurt with a head kick in round 4, that fight showed what Israel Adesanya was made of. That fight was an absolute dogfight. I'm telling you, it had a different feel than any other fight that I've ever seen, and it felt like the two of them were fighting to the death. With the way it ended, with Adesanya pouring on the damage and just absolutely dominating Kelvin Gastelum in that last minute or two of that fight. It literally looked like he was killing Gastelum at round 5 of that fight. I mean, I think the referee could have stopped it a lot earlier, but he realized that it was a close fight. He realized that maybe Kelvin could have had a chance at winning the decision, maybe, and he let Kelvin be a warrior. Kelvin wasn't completely covering up hopelessly. I mean, he was constantly moving and trying to survive, but it was an absolute thrashing at the end of that fight. Could have easily been stopped, but Adesanya just showed what he was made of. He showed that good cardio. He lost round 4. He came back and won round 5 in a dominant fashion when he needed to. So it was just an incredible performance from Adesanya. Fight of the year, no doubt, between him and Gastelum. And now, talking about Whittaker's last fight, fight of the year in 2018, no doubt. That back and forth war with Yoel Romero, the rematch with Yoel Romero. The first fight, it was kind of an opposite. I think the first fight, Romero came out early, out-voluming Whittaker in rounds 1 and 2, and then Whittaker out-volumed him rounds 3, 4, and 5, won that decision. This time, it was reversed. Whittaker came out-volumed Romero in rounds 1 and 2. Round 3, Romero hurt Whittaker. Whittaker came back and was hurting Yoel back. I think Yoel still won the round, but Whittaker did the most amount of damage a fighter has ever done in that round and still lost the round. So it was an extremely close round. They were beating the absolute piss out of each other in round 3. Round 4 was probably a Whittaker round. Romero had some good moments in it, but Whittaker ultimately, I think, landed the better volume and won more of that round. I don't think the little knockdown or the Whittaker getting rocked at the end of round 4 stole the round for Romero, so that puts it up 3-1 headed into the 5th. And then Romero had a pretty dominant 5th round. He was able to hurt Whittaker pretty badly. Could have been a 10-8. I personally scored it a 10-9 and gave the fight 48-47 to Whittaker, but I can easily see you giving that fight a draw, 48 or 47-47 for either fighter. So both fights were extremely close between these two guys in their last matchups, and we'll get over to now thinking to start predicting how this fight will go down. One thing I will say is if you look at the Brunson fight between both of these guys have fought Derek Brunson. Both of them knocked him out in the first round, but they were a much different type of fight. Israel Adesanya had the better footwork. He was able to control that fight a little more. He was in control for majority of the fight. He was stuffing takedowns. He was using his footwork. He was outstriking Brunson at range. He was keeping it at his range, and he was punishing Brunson. Meanwhile, Brunson was able to get a little bit inside on Whittaker. He was able to hit him with some punches. He was able to get in on some takedowns. And it was a much sloppier kind of back and forth brawl type of fight, while Israel's was a calculated performance where he just dismantled Brunson. So I think that fight really shows the difference between their striking. And Whittaker is super tough. He is hard to take down. He's hard to get to hurt, but he just finds a home for that punch when it's necessary, and that's what he did versus Brunson. Even though he was getting overwhelmed and swarmed by Brunson, he just found that home for the punch and was able to finish him with that head kick later on in round 1. Meanwhile, Israel was just in control the entire time. He was finding the strikes to land. He eventually landed that knee that hurt Brunson, and then just with precision accuracy was able to finish Brunson with punches, knees, elbows. It was just a miraculous finish. But now getting down to comparing the two of these two, I think I would give the power edge to Whittaker. I think he hits with a little more power punch for punch, but the speed edge goes to Israel and the technique edge goes to Israel. So even though Israel doesn't have that one punch knockout power per se, he's so accurate and he's so precise with his striking that he does damage and he knocks people down. He's got, I think, 8 knockdowns in the UFC. So there is one kind of lingering question around this matchup, and that would be Whittaker's activity and his health. His last fight was in June of 2018. He broke his hand in that fight. versus Romero, and he took some time off after that fight. He was supposed to fight Kelvin Gastelum, went through the whole training camp, and the day of the fight, he discovered he had a hernia. The fight was canceled, and he had surgery on that hernia, and now he's coming back around 18 months later for this first fight in that amount of time, and he's coming back versus Israel Adesanya, who's been super active during that amount of time. So I think that's kind of being factored into the betting line here. I think that the reason why these odds are so close between, the reigning champion is actually the underdog technically in this fight. It's because there are those questions around Whittaker's health and around his activity and how fresh he's going to be in this fight. But personally, I don't think it's going to be a factor. I think that Whittaker is going to come in here in great shape, and he's going to be completely capable of going the full 5 rounds at a high output, and he's going to be capable of winning this fight for sure. Now, Whittaker has the better overall wrestling game of the two. He has elite level takedown defense, some of the best takedown defense in MMA history, and he can hit his own offensive takedowns from time to time if needed. But Israel Adesanya has also shown very good takedown defense in his tenure. His takedown defense has gotten better and better each fight. He did get taken down a little bit versus Gastelum, but he was able to get back to his feet in that fight. And I just think that it would not be a wise strategy for Whittaker to go for takedowns in this fight because it'll expand a lot of energy, and ultimately I don't see his top game being good enough to keep Israel down if he gets the takedown. So we're in for a striking match. That means these two are probably going to strike kickbox for 25 minutes straight, or until one man gets the knockout. So I see Whittaker attacking that lead leg of Israel Adesanya with that lead leg side kick. He's really active with that kick. He's going to be throwing a lot of jabs, and he's going to be looking to find homes for those power punches that he likes to rock you with. And he finds them from weird angles, man. Whittaker's striking style is extremely weird. And Kelvin Gastelum's striking style is a little more conventional. He doesn't have a very unpredictable offense. He's a southpaw. He throws a great left hand, and he was still able to do some damage on Israel Adesanya. He was still able to rock him with that head kick. He was still able to briefly drop him with that left hook. So Whittaker's striking should be diverse enough, and it should be powerful enough to hurt Israel if he's able to touch the chin of Israel in a good spot. But I think Israel's striking is also diverse enough. His defense is good enough. He would be able to pick Whittaker apart if this fight stays on the feet for long periods of time. So it's just such a close matchup. I really see one of these guys winning 48-47. I really see both of them winning rounds, both of them having success in different aspects. But ultimately, the biggest factor in this fight is the activity. Since Whittaker's last fight, Israel has fought 4 times. He fought the 5 5-minute rounds versus Tavares. He got the first round knockout over Brunson. He fought 3 5-minute rounds versus Anderson Silva, and then he fought 5 5-minute rounds versus Kelvin Gastelum. So he just has so much more octagon time recently. He's looked better. He's improving incredible amounts fight to fight. He really had a showcasing performance in that last fight versus Kelvin Gastelum, and I really lean Israel Adesanya in this fight due to the recent work that he's done. And I think this fight is, like I mentioned, it's going to be close. It's going to come down to who has the better cardio, who has the better output, the better style for winning rounds. And I think that's Israel Adesanya. I think he's a little more active fighter. He has the better cardio in rounds 3, 4, and 5. And I will think that will ultimately be where this fight is decided in the later rounds. And I'm going to rely on Israel Adesanya to have the better output and to win those later rounds to win this decision. So it is not a confident pick. I'm telling you, this is one of the hardest fights to predict ever in the history of the Martian MMA podcast, in my opinion. The last time I was this torn about a pick would probably be Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes, and I was wrong about that one. I think I predicted Moraes to get the victory in that one, and Cejudo went out there and proved me wrong. And I think this fight has a little bit of shades of Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega. That was a fight where Ortega was actually the favorite to Holloway as the underdog because there were those questions surrounding Holloway's health, and then Holloway went out there and looked like a minus 400 favorite. So anything could happen out there. We could see Rob's health be at tip-top shape. We could see him be extremely accurate and powerful like he was before the injury, before the Romero fights, and we could see him come out here and dismantle Izzy. We could see Israel do the same, but Ultimately, I think we're in for a very razor-thin decision in this one, and my pick is going to be Israel Adesanya to win the 48-47 decision. So I know the analysis for that main event was a little bit scattered, was a little bit all over the place because the pick is an unconfident one. It's kind of up in the air. I was watching fights on fights from both Whittaker and Adesanya, just expecting the conclusion to come to me. Usually, I watch a few fights of the guys, and the path to victory is the prediction comes naturally, but this fight, you have to do some really external thinking. You have to think hard and do real good research into this fight to accurately predict it, and it's a hard one, and I could be dead wrong about my pick with Israel winning the decision. But at this point in time, that's what I think is the most reliable at this point. So it's going to be a hell of a fucking pay-per-view. I really can't wait for this one to go down. And that's going to be all for this podcast. It's been episode 78, previewing the UFC 243 card. Not too many bets for this one so far. I think we got one unit on Hooker at -110. And really, I think that's all so far in terms of the betting window. I think that we will probably add some half unit to Dos Santos, maybe one full unit to Akman. Look to live bet Akman. Might bet De Castro as an underdog. Might bet Lima as a favorite. Might throw a value stab on Spivak, and might even end up with some action on Israel Adesanya towards fight night. You can see all my official bets posted on my Twitter account or my BetMMATips page. You can follow me on Twitter at UFO_UFC. That is UFO_UFC. You check me out on Twitter, and that's going to be all for this podcast, episode 78. Thank you for everybody for tuning in, and hope you enjoy the pay-per-view this weekend.